to those of you who are suffering. You know, starting a devotional with those words might have seemed kind of strange 3 or 6 months ago. Might have seemed like it was for a limited audience, particular group of people who were dealing with hardships. But now, with what our world is going through, what we are all going through together, doesn't seem so odd, does it? And that, of course, is on top of what you personally might have already been dealing with before all of this began. To those of you who are suffering. Maybe you are suffering from some debilitating health issue and you've asked God time after time, God, would you take this away? Would you heal me, please? Perhaps you've been struggling financially to make ends meet and this has been going on, and now with what's going on in the world, you just wonder how on earth you'll ever get back up on your feet. To those of you who are suffering. We all are suffering in different ways. And to have other people with whom we can talk about our hardships, our difficulties, the trials, the things that hurt and make us moan about what's going on in life. It's good to have other people. God has designed us to be in community with one another, to be able to talk to each other about what we're going through. And perhaps you're missing that community right now for that very reason, because doing it over video may not feel the same. We need one another, and it is good to be able to talk to one another about those things. But at the end of the day, that doesn't make what you're going through any easier or any better. Well, luckily, you're in good company, because the Apostle Paul was going through some suffering that he writes about in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, starting in verse 8. He says, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this. He doesn't detail exactly what it is that he's going through or what is tormenting him and causing him to suffer so. And maybe that's for our benefit, so that you and I can relate to what Paul is going through, because Paul suffered a lot, and yet this one thing caused him to plead and beg with the Lord to take it away. But notice how God responds in verse 9. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. What a great promise, because if I'm being honest, with the things that I've gone through over the last 6 or 9 months, I've heard some really strange things from other people, well-meaning people who wanted me to feel better. And they said things like, Jason, God won't give you more than you can handle. And while that sounds good and sounds like something that's biblical, I don't think it's entirely true. Because what I believe is actually true is that we are given suffering, we're allowed suffering into our lives, but God says, but along with that, I will give you grace that is sufficient. Notice, not overflowing or overabundant or this kind of fake, I got to be joyful all the time, but I will give you grace that is sufficient to lift you up, to sustain you, to hold you, to cause you to be able to get through what you're going through for today. Right? Because like Jesus said, all we have is today, and today's worries are enough and of themselves. So I want you to know, friends, that whatever it is that you're going through, perhaps it'd be best to name that thing out loud, to admit, at least to yourself, what's on your plate, what things you're dealing with in your life. Just say them out loud. It feels good to get those things off your chest and just say what they are. But beyond that, also declaring to God, God, I believe that your grace is sufficient for fill in the blank. God, I believe that your grace is sufficient for this road of cancer. God, I believe that your grace is sufficient in spite of depression. God, I believe that your grace is sufficient in spite of financial difficulties. God, I believe that your grace is sufficient in spite of what I'm going through, in spite of what my community and our world is going through. That you're going to sustain me and bring me through this, that you love me, that you know what I'm going through. And that even though this thing seems overwhelming and unbearable at times, that I can say with confidence, your grace is sufficient for me.